Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of American University, Neil Kerwin.
Please. Mr. Prime Minister, distinguished Canadian and international guests, welcome to American University and the School of International Service. Our School of International Service is now one of the largest and most highly regarded schools of its kind in the nation, and we think in the world. We are honored to host this important event because our university's strategic plan calls as a central goal to bring American University to the world and the world to American University. Our special guest, the Prime Minister, has set out an ambitious agenda. That agenda includes issues ranging from gender equity to climate change, to a call for Canada to exercise global leadership, evidenced most recently by his nation's role in the Syrian refugee crisis. Those and many other elements of his agenda are issues that the faculty and students of this school and others across our campus study in depth, they master, and then they go on to influence thinking, scholarship, and policy. Today we add the Prime Minister and his name to a long list of world leaders who have spoken in this beautiful space. This past August, President Obama visited American University to speak about the Iran nuclear deal. And in July of 2010, President Obama gave his major immigration speech, calling for a system that reflects our values as a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. A few hundred feet from here, in 1963, President Kennedy gave one of his most important speeches to de-escalate international tension and lessen the threat of nuclear war. We at American University are proud of our academic heritage of educating the next generation of leaders to address global challenges. Our 13,000 students come from every nation, more than 150 countries, and some 24 different faiths are represented in the student body. But more than just providing exceptional academic preparation for highly motivated students, our university is a place where cultures, perspectives, and points of view are discussed with passion, but always, we hope, with respect. That's a core value of American University, one we practice and we try to protect. That's why world leaders like the Prime Minister come to our campus to test ideas, share policy, and create change. It's now my pleasure to introduce the Dean of the School of International Service, Dr. James Goldgeier.
Thank you, President Kerwin. It's great to see everyone here. How you guys doing in the balcony up there? Awesome. It's a great honor to welcome all of you, and especially our guest, the Prime Minister of Canada, to the School of International Service. SIS was founded in 1957 through a call by President Dwight Eisenhower to establish a school designed to wage peace. And our 3,000 undergraduate and graduate students, 120 full-time faculty, 70 staff, and more than 15,000 SIS alumni all over the world take that call seriously every day through their research, classes, internships, and careers in government, nonprofits, and business. Today, I'm honored to introduce you to Canada's 23rd Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. On October 19, 2015, Mr. Trudeau led the country's Liberal Party to victory, winning a majority government with seats in every province and territory across the country. He was elected on a platform for change and growing the middle class. Sworn in on November 4th, 2015, he presented an equal number of men and women in cabinet, a first in Canada's history. Mr. Trudeau made immediate news with his pledge that Canada would resettle 25,000 Syrian refugees. A pledge that has already been fulfilled. This was a tremendous humanitarian gesture and an example for us all. And so many of those refugees will make major contributions to Canadian society in the coming decades. The Prime Minister will make brief remarks, and then we will move directly to a Q&A with our students. So students, please line up at the microphones on either side. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Thank you, guys. Well, thank you for coming out today. I have to admit that this is something that really matters to me. As much as I could over the past years, I get out to universities, to high schools, to colleges, and do what I'm about to do here. I mean, I'm very aware that this is a place where there's a great tradition of politicians coming forward and giving important speeches. JFK being an extraordinary example, but President Obama more recently. Except I'm going to try and turn that around a little bit, and instead of focusing on what the leader has to say to all of you, I'm very much interested in hearing from all of you and what you have to say to me. Because ultimately, the work that I'm doing right now, the work that President Obama and I did yesterday, wasn't so much focused on the coming months as much as the coming decades. We're focused on your future. And in order to stay focused on your future in the right way, because that's the only way of building the kind of prosperity we need in our countries, the kind of future we need to have for coming generations when we look at the big issues, whether it's climate change, whether it's opportunity for everyone, whether it's international engagement, development, security issues, is to keep in mind the people we're doing it for and who's going to be the ultimate beneficiaries of the decisions that we take, good or negative, these days. We're in an incredibly short-term world when it comes to so many different aspects of our lives, whether it's not being satisfied with a pizza in 30 minutes, we now need it in 30 seconds out of the microwave. When we look as citizens and electors at the political process, there's a real instinct to say, well, what have you done for me lately, and what are you going to do for me right now? And the idea of building for the next decade, building for the next generation, seems implausible when you look at so much of what politics is all about. And it's not because people don't want their leaders to be focused on that. It's because largely there's a degree of cynicism about the capacity of the political system itself to effectively deal with 10 years out, with 20 years out. So there's a tendency to want to throw up our hands and say, okay, well, we can't do much about it, so let's just focus on what's going to help me right now in the immediate, and we'll hope that eventually things will work out. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't quite work as much anymore. The pressures we're facing are global, or broad, or deep, and we actually need to start thinking responsibly and realistically about the impacts that our actions today, this month, this year will have 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, long after the current crop of people in power are actually making decisions. And for me, one of the best ways to make sure that that thinking is folded into the political process and the process of governance is regular contact with and empowerment of young folks like all of you. It's not just about, and people talk about this all the time, the need to mobilize young people who are often disenchanted with politics to get out and vote. It's more about recognizing that the mindsets that you bring with you, the openness to change, because your lives are all about change from from living at home to living at university to starting a career, finding your own space and starting a family. Massive transformations of your lives that are just par for the course of what you're going through and what the reality of this decade you're part of right now. Whereas people who are settled in a career path, responsibilities, mortgage, saving towards retirement are much more set in the status quo. We need you to be thinking and challenging us about why we're doing this, why we're doing that, why we're not doing this, how we're doing this differently. And that means not just speaking up, but it also means getting involved. It also means understanding that your voices are an essential part of the mix to challenge us to think about your future instead of just our short-term future or a future that could be seen as a linear extension of the short term. Whereas we know we're going to need leaps. We're going to need to rethink an awful lot of things in the coming years. Climate change being a great example. What we agreed to in a continental approach yesterday, the President and I, will go a long way towards really setting the groundwork for the understanding that most people have, certainly people of this generation get, that you cannot anymore make a choice between what's good for the environment and what's good for the economy. They go together. The kind of future we need is going to have clean jobs and energy efficiency and renewable resources and renewable energy sources. And that idea of giving up on economic progress so we can protect the environment no longer makes sense, because the only way we're going to build a strong, sustainable economy is by cherishing the ecosystem services and the natural, renewable resources that underpin everything else that we do as human activity. So making strong commitments on protecting the Arctic, working towards continental energy and resource strategies, these are the kinds of things that we need to build on, particularly following the success of the Paris Agreement, which people can talk about the kind of impact that it'll actually have, but every country in the world stepped up and said, we need to do this, we need to be part of it, and that sends a clear message both to citizens and, quite frankly, to businesses and innovators and entrepreneurs that this is the way the world is going. We recognize that. Now it's a race to see who can get there successfully fastest and make the most benefit from it, because for all that climate change is a very real challenge, it's also an incredible opportunity to rethink how we function and to innovate around how we succeed. And on top of that, there are many other big issues we need to deal with. The issue of diversity, which is something that obviously in a great school like American University and Center for International Service, I'm expecting to see a broad range of faces and backgrounds in any crowd I look at. The reality is, we walk down the streets in any city in this great country, in our two great countries, and you see a tremendous diversity of perspectives and views. And we know that globalization, that migrations, that refugee crises, that the challenges that the world is facing is going to mean a greater flow of people across borders, living here, settling there, working here, working there. And we have to understand that diversity, while bringing certain challenges with it, ultimately is a tremendous source of strength. Being able to draw on different perspectives, particularly when they're brought together around shared values, values of openness, respect, desire to succeed, willingness to work together, compassion, the kinds of values that have created our free and democratic societies, needs to be something that we embrace and understand is the path to success for our world in the 21st century. So I'm excited to see the extraordinary mix here at American University, but know that this is, again, something that this generation gets to a greater degree than previous generations, and it's a place we can lead on, and we need to. More than that, how we continue to engage in big issues around growing our economy, making sure that we're creating opportunities for people to succeed, to follow their own potential, to contribute in ways that are different than used to be. I mean, the model of success in the past was, depending on how good grades you got in school, you'd get a good job, you'd start in the mailroom, you'd work your way up to vice president, you'd get a gold watch at the end of your career. You could make it to the president of the company if you married the boss's daughter, but I mean, that's an old way of looking at things. Right now, the career paths that we're gonna have will jump around everywhere. I mean, it's preposterous to think that a former snowboard instructor and nightclub bouncer could end up the Prime Minister of Canada, But the experiences that we accumulate along the way in multiple career paths and multiple engagements that define us and shape us as individuals and leaders are extremely important, extremely varied. And that's one of the really exciting things for me about this generation, about how we're engaging with the world. So, people have looked a lot at how, how I personally pulled together a team that got elected in Canada under particular circumstances, and a surprise to a lot of people that we could come from distant third place to win a majority government. But a big part of the secret was spending a lot of time listening to people, talking about, okay, if you could take away all the cynicism from politics, if you could, just design and invent the kind of society, the kind of world you'd like to live in. It can't happen. We know it can't happen. But if you could imagine the kind of country you'd want to live in, what would it look like? And we built a platform and an approach to politics that reflected what people really expressed that they wanted to see in politics. Collaborative, respectful, mindful of each other, drawing on our positive instincts rather than our fears and our divisions, which are always very effective in politics in the short term, makes it harder to govern in the long term. And we presented that to Canadians. And people said, no, attack ads work, negativity works. And we said, yeah, sometimes. But we're going to try something different because I know people are tired of that. And we did it and we succeeded. And that leaves us a certain leeway now to continue to try and govern in a way that takes real decisions that sometimes are unpopular but based on science, that engage with a longer term vision of how a free, open, just society must be, and continue to constantly challenge ourselves to do things better, to do things differently, and to improve the way things have been done, and to question orthodoxies. And quite frankly, I couldn't have done it if it hadn't been for the voices and the challenges from rooms like this one, right across Canada and to a certain extent around the world. So I thank you in advance for all your great questions, and I look forward to engaging with them. Thank you very much. Merci. So we do have mics on the right and on the left, and I'm going to alternate back and forth, and I'm going to try and keep my questions and my answers short. So I'd very much appreciate if you guys kept your questions short, the more we can get through, the better we'll be. Wow. Start going over the mics on this side, guys, because and I think that's pretty much it. If you're still sitting down, you're not getting a question, unfortunately. But we'll start right here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for doing this. I think this is a great opportunity to be able to talk to leaders internationally and be able to connect in the way that you mentioned. My name is Lucas Olson. I'm a Killam Fellow from undergraduate, so I had the opportunity to study in Canada at the University of Alberta in undergrad, and I'm a master's student here in international development. And I've always found it interesting, the relationship that Canada has with First Nations people, and I know you've been vocal about this issue, appointing Jody Wilson-Raybould to Justin Minister and Hunter Tutu to the Fisheries Ministry, two prominent First Nations people. What have you learned from the experience of Indigenous people in the U.S., and what could the U.S. learn from Canada?
I mean, I don't know that we have an awful lot to teach anyone on how to engage and empower and respect Indigenous peoples in Canada. We've made attempts over the past years, but they've always fallen short. And quite frankly, for a country that prides itself on its reasonableness, on its defense of human rights, on its positive role modeling in the world, we haven't done a very good job over the past generations, indeed centuries, with the First Peoples who, quite frankly, if you've ever been up to Canada in February, the first colonists, the first settlers wouldn't have survived without the friendship and guidance and support of people who'd figured out how to live in this extraordinary place for millennia before us. We have an awful lot of work to do to renew that relationship based on respect, trust, partnership, a understanding that we share this land as stewards, and knowing as well that as we're grappling as a 21st century society with the respect for the natural world and integration of economy and environment, we could do worse than draw on the cultural teachings and historical knowledge that Indigenous communities have about how to create proper balance with the land and how to respect it. So we have an awful lot of work to do, but I am serious about doing that, and quite frankly, naming as Attorney General of Canada and Minister of Justice, an extraordinary Indigenous woman, was a really important step in that. And as we look to the high Arctic and the importance of the Arctic and climate change, it was important to me as well to make sure that the person responsible for our fisheries and oceans, and indeed our Coast Guard, was a strong Indigenous voice. And I'm happy to introduce to you today Hunter Tutu, our Minister of Fisheries and Oceans from the high Arctic. Next question.
Prime Minister, such a pleasure. My name is Andrea Tanco. I'm from Mexico. So I'm actually here to ask you to talk more about how do you envision the North American trade agreement happening in the next years? I think it's great that you're putting a lot of emphasis on climate change. So climate change is going to have to be included in the new envisioning of North America Alliance. So how's your administration going to tackle that issue, and how do you imagine the trilateral relationship?
Well, I've already had some wonderful conversations with President Peña Nieto about climate change, about a continental energy strategy. I mean, there's no question that the continent from Mexico to the US to Canada, together working on energy issues, on addressing environmental concerns, of figuring out how to get things right here, will make a significant dent, not just in global emissions, but in the narrative that we engage with the world on. And if we can develop the kinds of solutions that, quite frankly, developing countries around the world, from the big ones like India and China to small Caribbean and Pacific Island states, we can make a tremendous impact, and the impact that we have to if we're going to keep warming to under 2 degrees and perhaps even reach the great target of 1.5 degrees. But in order to do that, we need to be a lot more collaborative with our neighbors and re-engaging in a positive way with our NAFTA partners, making sure that irritants like the Mexican visa requirement on visits to Canada is done away with, coordinating, collaborating, and looking at the integration of our manufacturing supply chains in a positive way instead of always a negative either or. I think there's tremendous work to be done, and I'm looking forward to bringing together all the President Obama and President Peña Nieto to Canada this summer for our North American Leaders Summit, so we can exactly engage in these issues.
Gracias.
De nada.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I am Jahan, an international student from Pakistan, from Punjab region, and it was really great to see so many Punjabis in your cabinet. So,
Yes, I have more Sikhs in my cabinet than Modi does.
So my question is, from yesterday's conversation with President Obama, there was a similar question that he is being criticized. That's quite ironic, but real, that he's being criticized for the rise of the conservative hardliners, especially Donald Trump, because he's being blamed that it was his policies that has resulted in this. So what are your plans to stem a similar rise of right-wing or conservative, another Trump in Canada?
We had an election in the fall that featured a number of different narratives that are repeating themselves around the world. Certainly in Europe, with some of the challenges they're facing with migrants. Here in the States, to a certain extent, during your primary season, we had a conservative government that was talking about fear and division as a way of moving forward, whether it was talking about snitch lines for barbaric cultural practices, so you could call up if your neighbors were engaged in barbaric cultural practices. They could never quite explain why 911 wasn't an effective line when you see mistreatment or such. There was also real division around headscarves and a sort of tone of negativity that was very compelling and certainly gained a certain amount of traction. But I found that Canadians, in any case, find it hard to sustain anger and fear for very long. We are an optimistic, hopeful people. We know and generally like our neighbors. Whoa, I meant that within Canada, but it applies to the United States too. And having an approach that really emphasized that whenever you grab any disparate group of people together and have some conversations, you realize that the things that unite us are always far greater than the things that divide us. And I think that ultimately is what democracies keep moving steadily towards. So I have confidence in the American electorate and look forward to working with whoever you elect come November. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ford Fisher, and I'm a student at the School of Communications at American University. My question has a little tinge of humor to it, but also a serious element. As was just asked in the last question, we have a presidential candidate right now who says he would build a border wall with Mexico and make them pay for it. And we have a lot of Americans who earnestly say, I would leave and go to Canada if we elected Trump as president. So my question to you is, how would you deal with an influx of American immigrants to Canada? Would you open your gates to American immigrants, or would you build a wall and make America pay for it?
Every election season, there are people who swear that if the candidate they don't like gets elected, they're moving to Canada. If over the past decades that had been the case, we'd have more people in Canada than the United States right now, instead of being 1/10 your size. It becomes an easy thing to cry out. Every year, there are Canadians who move to the United States. Every year there are Americans who move up to Canada. That's just the nature of our friendship and relationship, and to link it too much to politics is, as you point out, humorous and a trope that comes up through election seasons. But the reality is the integration of our countries, the work we do together, the engagement on so many different issues means that there'll always be flows back and forth, and one must never fret or be disappointed with that at the same time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. You are an inspiration for many young people like me. I'm Nasir, a graduate student of International Development at SIS. I've been actually following Canada's economy for personal reasons. I'm interested in it. I have two questions for you. First of all, the energy sector in Canada has been struggling, particularly in Alberta, and many people are frustrated. So first question, what's your plan to improve the situation? Second question, I have two friends who are big fan of you. Can I have autograph for them? By the way, I am happy to advise you if needed.
Thank you very much. Maybe you can stand by the door when I leave, because for the second question. For the first one, the energy sector, obviously the drop in oil prices has hit energy-producing countries very hard right around the world, and Canada certainly is no exception. One of the challenges we have to face is to make sure that we're properly diversifying our economy. Canada has tremendous natural resources, including energy resources, but I always feel that our greatest strength is the human resources that we apply to both the knowledge economy and our natural resource sector, the innovation, the science, the research that we're doing to make sure that we're always doing better with that. So we're going through a tough time right now, but at the same time it gives us an opportunity to rethink certain sectors and to ensure that when oil prices start to rise again, we have taken advantage of this sort of lull to make sure that we have innovated in terms of efficiency, in terms of environmental responsibility, in terms of how we're engaging in cutting-edge, thoughtful ways to get through the years where we will still be dependent on fossil fuels and make sure we end up as quickly as possible into a world where renewable energy actually drives our economy. Canada needs to be part of it, and indeed our oil sector companies are investing massively in solar and wind, in geothermal, in a broad range of solutions. And that's, quite frankly, what we have to do. In the meantime, there are a lot of families who are out of work in Alberta because there had been such a boom in terms of the oil sector there that we're very concerned about, and we're working with them to ensure that we're able to support them through this tough time in ways that will continue to contribute to the economy in the coming years. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Abdullah Bufilat. I'm a grad student here studying security at SIS. My question is, Canada recently withdrew its fighter jets from the anti-ISIS coalition. However, your country has deployed combat advisors and intelligence specialists, and you've taken on a greater role in the humanitarian crisis. What was the shift behind the shift in strategy, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, it's a great question. There are 65 different countries in the coalition against ISIS right now, and they all have different approaches and different areas of expertise and different ways of engaging. Canada had, for the past couple of years, 6 CF-18 fighter jets involved in the airstrikes campaign against ground targets in Iraq and a little bit in Syria. When we took office, we came into office with a pledge to end the direct combat portion of our mission, and to look at a whole-of-government approach that would demonstrate that Canada is very much a strong and engaged partner in the war and the fight against ISIL, but doing so in a way that suits our best capabilities. There are lots of countries out there that do very good with airstrikes, and having the Gulf states actually participating in airstrikes is a strong piece of legitimacy for those airstrikes, because as we know from the experiences recently in Libya, making sure that it's not just Western forces trying to fix things in difficult areas is quite important. So what we actually shifted to was something that Canada has extraordinary expertise in, that was hard-earned through 10 years in Afghanistan, for example, where we did an awful lot of work training local troops to be more effective at pushing back, in that case against the Taliban, and now we'll be doing that against ISIL. We're also engaged in more intelligence work. We're doing more directly to support the neighboring countries like Jordan and Lebanon, and to a certain extent Turkey, who are receiving influxes of migrants fleeing for their lives. We're engaged more in diplomatic levels. We're doing more humanitarian stuff. It reflects both the more whole-of-government approach that I think has a chance to success, of greater success, where military engagement is certainly a part of it, but is not the sum total of it. And it also reflects that this is an evolving situation. In the coming years are going to bring forward different needs, and we feel that right now, making sure that local troops have the capacity to be most effective in taking back their homes, their land, their communities, is a very useful way for Canada to help both in the immediate, but also as we look towards creating medium and longer term stability in a very troubled region of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hello, Prime Minister. My name is Olivia Curl. I'm a graduate of the School of International Service, and I now work in girls' education advocacy. And right now in America, it seems to be a very tense time, a little bit of a cynical time. I know a lot of my peers look up to Canada and think, wow, they're diverse up there, they're feministy up there, they seem to be happy up there. And we look around us and think, oh God, what is happening? And I wanted to ask about your approach to compassion, both at an individual level, a political level, and a government level, particularly in regards to bigotry and diversity. We've seen a spike in hate crimes against Muslim Americans and people perceived as Muslim Americans in the United States, especially in the last few months. I think we can all agree that rhetoric is a huge part of that. And as you've welcomed 25,000 Syrian refugees into your country, I would love my country to do the same. What is your approach to addressing the angry, hateful, maybe even hangry people in our country and yours who are really fearful? What is your approach to addressing those concerns to make a more welcoming community?
Well, I think a big part of it is understanding that it's easy to stoke anger, or it's easy to feel angry if you're worried about your next paycheck, you're worried about being able to pay your rent, you're worried that your kids are not going to have the kind of future that you would want for them, and always it's easier to point blame and to say, oh, it's this person's fault or that group's fault, and feel satisfied that it's not that there's somehow a solution in being angry or pointing out people who are to blame for your misfortune. It's much harder to build a sense of optimism and shared prosperity where we realize that it's not a zero-sum game. If everyone on your street is doing better, then you're all going to do better, including you. But we get into this sort of closed-in, protectionistic, closed-minded approach when things get difficult, that I think one of the responsibilities of leadership is to draw people out of that, to understand that countries like ours need people to work together, to succeed together, or else we all fail alone. And that narrative needs to be strong enough and based enough in people's everyday lives to counter it. I mean, if you once people realize there was a proposal by one of our provinces a few years ago to ensure that people working for the government would do so without having religious symbols evident. So a big cross of David, or a Star of David, or a Christian cross, or more specifically, a turban or a hijab. Because the state is secular, we won't have religious symbols at the kiosk where you go pay your parking tickets, for example. And that was an idea that was couched in equality. The idea that, this is about freeing people from the oppressive yoke of religion and allowing everyone to be equal, and religions that force a particular gender, men to wear a turban or women to wear a hijab, will no longer have that dominance over individuals. And as it was framed of equality and freedom, people said, oh no, that's That's a fairly reasonable thing. We're a free country. Of course, the state should be secular. That's a reasonable proposal. And it was sold that way. And until people suddenly realized what that meant in reality was a young woman who chose to wear a hijab could be fired from her job working at a counter in a hospital. People said, well, no, that's not what we meant at all. And they thought about the consequence of things, and that proposal was rejected as it needs to be. But in order to get to that place, we have to have public discourse that goes beyond the knee-jerk reactions. And one of the key elements of that, and a point at which I am just so incredibly proud of Canadians, is there was a moment in our election campaign where the governing Conservatives put forward a proposal to strip, and actually enacted it before the election, to remove the citizenship from Canadian citizens convicted of terrorism. Dual citizens in this case. Which, quite frankly, they saw as a great idea, because here they were, these are people convicted of terrorism against our country, or acts of war against our country, and they are therefore forfeiting their right to be citizens. Which seems like a reasonable thing, again, on the front of it. But when you actually look at it and realize that that means someone convicted of terrorism with a dual citizenship could have a different consequence under the law than a Canadian homegrown terrorist who has Canadian citizenship and is a sixth-generation Canadian and therefore can't have their citizenship removed at all, you devalue the citizenship of everyone by making it conditional on good behavior, or on non-heinous behavior, which ultimately is the same thing. So I found myself in the situation on stage against the former Prime Minister, arguing that yes, a man who he had just stripped the citizenship of for being convicted of a terrorist act should have his Canadian citizenship restored, even though he had literally, and actually figuratively, but perhaps even literally, ripped up his Canadian passport. And yet I stand here as Prime Minister of Canada. People are reasonable. People need to understand that the rights and freedoms that keep us free and democratic societies aren't always easy and aren't always sort of knee-jerk adapted to how we'd like the world to be. But they are essential in terms of being the country we are and the peoples we are. And whether it's on issues of rights like feminism, or women's right to choose, or respect for diversity, these are things that aren't always easy to have conversations about and require people to step out of their comfort zones. But on that, young people have a big job in convincing your parents and the previous generations as much as everything else, but that's a path that has been walked by all generations previously at the same time, every step of the way, from the civil rights movement to the women's suffragette movement to everything else. So I have tremendous hope as long as we can keep conversations about our future based on reasonable, respectful discussions. And ultimately, that's where they end up every time.
Thank you so much. And we brought girls' education bumper stickers for you because you're a feminist and we really appreciate that about you.
Absolutely. On girls' education, my wife and President Obama, my wife Sophie and Michelle Obama yesterday did a big thing for women and girls, and they certainly are great examples of strong feminists stepping forward, and there are lots of extraordinary women standing up for women's rights and fighting for it. But I need more men to do that too. Men need to be comfortable calling themselves feminists because it's about fighting for rights, it's fighting for equality, it's fighting for the basic respect that we are all owed. I have to keep updating this one, but it's 2016, guys. Let's all get with the program. Thank you. Oh no, you know I'm getting the hook. That's like.
We have time for one last question. It's your folks who are saying it, so well, one last question.
Sorry.
Hi, how's it going? I'm Brent Bowers, master's student at School of International Service. Kind of a tough act to follow, but I just wanted to, NASA astronaut Scott Kelly just came back to Earth after stunning the world with photography from orbit. Canada, too, has a very long tradition of cooperation in space, the least of which being the Canada-Arm, thank you. And Chris Hadfield, who also stunned audiences worldwide with his performance in outer space. What do you see in terms of a policy vessel, the value of space exploration in the final frontier?
I like the slipping in the final frontier. He knows I'm a Star Trek, Star Wars geek. The fact is, science in general is essential. How we innovate, how we figure things out, how we understand the universe, how we dig into the fundamentals of pure science, how we learn how to apply them, how we develop the kinds of solutions, commercializations, innovations that are going to make our lives better in the short term and surprise us in the long term with changes that we didn't see coming. These are things that really matter. Canada has a long history of cooperation with NASA. I remember a Canadian physics professor of mine pointing out, because he'd worked on a couple of space programs at one point, NASA astronauts love having Canadian scientists down because we're really good at building redundancies into things that get sent up. And I said, well, why is that? He goes, I think it's because of the winter. We know if something's going to make it through the winter, it really has to be built solidly. And there's an expectation of winter is coming. Never mind, I didn't make a Game of Thrones reference. But how we engage in pushing the limits of human knowledge, challenging ourselves, of understanding that our responsibilities as the only place we know of that has sentient life in the universe, we've got to make this work. I think what we have, just from a purely scientific end, is a little ball of anti-entropy right here on planet Earth, and how we bring a little more order to the world, to the chaos that is the universe. I think we have a responsibility to keep engaging. I have personally been inspired by a number of extraordinary astronauts. My Minister of Transport is Canada's first astronaut, Mark Garneau. Who better to keep the trains running on time than a man who's circled the Earth faster than anyone else. But this idea of respect for science and engagement internationally, because I think space is an extraordinary example of collaboration between countries around the world to ensure that, we have Canadian satellites that go up regularly or used to go up regularly on Russian rockets. There's an engagement that I think reminds us as we engage up there that all of us down here are ultimately extremely interlinked in just about everything we are and we do. I want to thank you all for the questions. I want to thank you for your interest in Canada and for your engagement with the world. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you very, very much.
Have a great rest of your visit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just once again, so grateful to the Prime Minister for being here. You're welcome back to the School of International Service and American University anytime. And just ask people to stay seated until the delegation has departed. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.